We just to prove my point. The presentation is expected to last about 2 hours. That's about what it was last year. So in a minute, Judy will be reviewing the agenda and provide an overview of the webinar. But first, there are a few things I'd like to go over and mention. Next slide, please. So the Historic Trust was established back in 1967, and we've been awarding grants since 1990. Our mission remains the same: to advance historic preservation in New Jersey, and the Preserve New Jersey grant program is one of the ways we fulfill that mission. The funding for our grants come from a percentage of the New Jersey corporate business tax. It is part of the constitutionally dedicated funds used by Green Acres, Farmland Preservation, Blue Acres, and of course the Historic Trust. Next, please. The Historic Trust is an in but not of agency of government. While we are located and get support from the Department of Community Affairs, we have a separate board of trustees that govern our programs. The board is comprised of 12 citizen members nominated by the governor and 3 ex officio members representing Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Treasury, and Department of Community Affairs. Here's a quick look at the proposed schedule for this grant round. You'll see that applications will be due on April 16th of this year, 4 p.m., and that's a hard deadline, 4 p.m. We really encourage you to get it in early if possible. But all applications need to be complete by 4 p.m. If it's past 4 p.m., we cannot accept it. So again, note that time and date. Monday, August 3rd is a date that we have that all resources must be either listed or certified eligible for listing on either New Jersey and or national registers of historic preservation of historic places. Sorry. Between May and September, staff will be reviewing those applications, making site visits, and our evaluator panel, which are outside evaluators, will be reviewing those applications at that time too, and they'll be meeting in September. On September 30th, the New Jersey Board of Trustees will vote on its recommendations for this year's grant awards. No date has been determined yet, but generally between October and November of this year is when the Garden State Preservation Trust will be reviewing our board's recommendations and submitting that final recommendation to the legislature for passage, and then waiting for governor's signature. Based on years past, that usually happens sometimes between January and March. This year, actually, legislature passed our bill on the 22nd of December, and the governor signed it on the 23rd. So hopefully it'll be a similar type of thing this year as well. So we have advertised availability of $10 million for this grant round. The exact amount awarded will depend on the amount of CBT funds collected and made available to us. I assume, like previous years, that we will receive much more in requests than the funds available. So pay close attention to the presenters today so that you can submit the strongest possible application and make your chances of award as great as possible. Next, please. So here's a list of trust staff members. You'll be hearing from many of them today during this presentation. We will provide staff contact information at the end of the presentation, and is also available on our website. Again, thank you for joining us today. Good luck with your application and your projects. I'll now turn the presentation over to Judy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Judy Murphy, and I'm going to get us started today by briefly going over our agenda and then giving an overview of our grant guidelines. So this is a webinar, which means that the staff can't see or hear you as attendees. To communicate, we have access to a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Any questions you have can be typed into that designated section. We'll address any questions that are entered at the end of each section, as well as at the end of the webinar. We'll be able to answer questions either verbally or directly into the Q&A function. Any project-specific questions that you may have should be sent to the njht@dca.nj.gov email address, so you can be directed to a program officer who can answer your specific questions. Also, just to note, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on our website at some point next week. For your reference, our website is www.njht.org, and the video will be located under the Resources tab at the top of our homepage. For our agenda today, I'm going to start off by discussing our grant guidelines. We'll then move on to our archaeological requirements and go over each application type. Once we finish going over each application type, we'll go over the attachment requirements, as well as how to set your application apart from others. At the end of the presentation, we'll answer any remaining questions. We highly recommend that you stay with us until the end, since all of these sections are important in developing a successful application. Next slide. Now we're going to move on to grant guidelines. I do want to note that the section I'm about to go through is just a brief overview, and my colleagues will be going into further detail later in the presentation. If you have questions related to a specific grant type, it would be best to ask those questions when we get to that section in the presentation, as it will more than likely be discussed during that section. So every year, we review our applications and make changes based on feedback from our applicants and staff. Our aim is always to make the applications more concise by reducing redundancy, clarifying the information requested, including more examples, and limiting the word count for questions that may not need as detailed answers as others. This year, there are a few important things to note. For our capital grants, multi-phase requests are now considered a capital level 3 multi-phase grant type in the capital application. It's also important to note that for capital grants, the property will need to be listed on the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places to be awarded a grant. If your property is not yet registered, please contact the Historic Trust to discuss this further with a program officer. This year, we also want to stress that applications must be submitted online with all supporting documents received on a USB drive by 4 p.m. on April 16th. Any information submitted after the application deadline will not be accepted or reviewed. And just as a reminder, please review the PDF or Word document of the application before starting the online application form. These documents can be found on our website under the Resources tab. The most notable changes to our applications this year are the special initiatives. In addition to the underrepresented histories, we have added climate resiliency and cultural landscapes. I'll go into each of these initiatives further on the following slides. Our first special initiative is to highlight underrepresented histories. In keeping in line with New Jersey's statewide preservation plan, we are seeking to expand representation of marginalized groups and empower meaningful involvement of minority constituencies in the identification, preservation, and interpretation of historic resources. We hope to encourage projects that promote underrepresented histories, including Black history, civil rights history, women's history, disability history, Indigenous history, Latinx history, LGBTQIA+ history, and the history of any other marginalized group. These could be capital projects of buildings with a connection to underrepresented groups and histories, the identification and evaluation of sites through things such as National Register nominations, preservation plans, archaeological research, or architectural surveys, or updates to the interpretation of sites that include marginalized histories such as exhibits and programming. We are also responding to the ever-growing need to consider climate-related impacts to historic sites by adding climate resiliency to our initiatives. Our historic resources are becoming increasingly threatened by severe weather, including high winds, widespread flooding, and even forest fires. That's why it's essential for New Jersey's historic sites to account for climate change when taking a holistic approach to preservation. Therefore, this initiative encourages applications that address climate resiliency projects. Some examples include planning for long-term risk management, adapting to change in environmental conditions, mitigating flooding, incorporating green technologies and sustainable practices, and interpreting climate change. The fact sheet with more examples of projects that fall under this initiative can be found on our website. Our last special initiative, excuse me, for this year highlights cultural landscapes. The Trust goal is to enhance representation and involvement in the identification, preservation, and interpretation of cultural landscapes. The National Park Service defines cultural landscapes as landscapes that have significance in American history and authenticity to a historic time period. These can include human-modified ecosystems such as forests, prairies, and rivers, as well as constructed works such as mounds, terraces, structures, gardens, and farmsteads. To be considered for this initiative, the scope of the proposed project must directly investigate, document, assess, and/or physically preserve, restore, rehabilitate, or reconstruct the landscape associated with a specific historic resource. Examples of these efforts could include master plans, archaeological investigations, interpretation of evolving landscapes, and capital investments such as restoration. For any project-specific questions related to these initiatives, please reach out to a program officer after the presentation and we'll be happy to answer them. So we are officially in our 8th year of using the online application form, which means that for many of you, this information will sound pretty familiar. First and foremost, we encourage you to start the application process as early as possible. This will allow you plenty of time to gather the necessary information and to contact us if you have any questions. You'll want to make an account on FormSite so you can save and return to your application. Trust staff do not have access to any usernames or passwords you create, so please make sure to save that information for your records. If you don't save that information and you lose it, you'll have to contact FormSite to help you retrieve it. So to avoid all of that, we recommend you keep your login information somewhere safe. Each grant round, every applicant, including return-in applicants, will need to make a new FormSite account. So if you set up an account last year, it will not work for this grant round. A new account needs to be created. However, you can reuse your username and password from last year when you set up your new account. Each application type is its own online form. Therefore, you will need to have one account per application type. Application types include capital, HSM, heritage tourism, and MCRP. So for example, if you're submitting 2 HSM applications, you'll only need one account because both applications fall under the same HSM type. On the other hand, if you're submitting 1 HSM application and 1 capital application, you'll need 2 separate accounts because they're on different application forms. Before filling out your application, you should first read through the PDF or Word version of the application so you have an understanding of the different sections and the information needed for each of them. This is helpful because you'll be able to see the application in its entirety instead of question by question, which is how FormSite will present it. Everyone has their own way of filling out the application, but we find that the best way is to type all of your answers into a Word document offline and copy and paste it into the online application. This is really helpful because it's easier to format your answers, and it also gives you a backup location where all of your information is safe in case something goes wrong, like your internet crashes in the middle of you filling out your application and the section you're working on isn't saved. You will want to pay attention to the word count and to make sure how much you write correlates with the allowable word count listed for the questions in FormSite because it will cut you off. You will also want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with the attachments checklist. Different application types have different application attachment checklists, so please make sure to pay attention to that. Make sure to review the checklist at the start of the application process because certain things like the governing body resolutions and assurances may take longer to obtain than other things. It is recommended that you check your board meeting schedule now so that you can plan accordingly. Next slide. So who's eligible for our grants? All applicants must fall under one of the following categories. Agencies or entities of government, whether at the county, municipal, or state level, or a nonprofit 501c organization that's compliant with the New Jersey charitable registration laws. Nonprofit applicants should submit their New Jersey charitable registration number, which we will check for compliance. We also have ownership requirements, which can differ slightly depending on the grant type. For your HSM grants, if the applicant doesn't own the resource outright, you'll need to provide us with a signed owner approval form that shows us that the owner of the building knows you're applying for the grant and is aware of the project's scope of work. For our heritage tourism grants, there are no ownership or lease requirements. But if the applicant isn't the owner, we will need a signed owner approval form, similar to the HSM grant. For municipal, county, and regional planning grants, there are no ownership or lease requirements, but we do require a municipal consent form from each municipality within the boundaries of the proposed project area. This requires the signature of the chief elected official of each municipality in which the project area is located. For capital grants, if the applicant doesn't own the property in fee simple, they'll need to show that they have a long-term lease with a minimum of 15 years remaining at the time of application submittal. If you don't have a long-term lease, you can pursue a signed joint signatory consent form, but this option does come with the caveat that the owner of the property must be an eligible applicant in their own right and will also have to act as a co-signer on the grant agreement. Most applicants choose to provide the lease if they can because it's more straightforward. Additionally, a signed owner approval form will also need to be provided if the applicant isn't the owner of the property. We'll be going over this in further detail for each grant type later on in the presentation. Is your property eligible? To qualify for our grants, the subject property shall be individually listed in the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places, or a contributing resource in a historic district that is listed in the New Jersey or National Registers, or determined eligible for listing by the State Historic Preservation Office. If the property is a contributing resource to a listed historic district, you will need to provide documentation either in the form of the nomination itself or a letter from the State Historic Preservation Office stating that it is in fact a contributing resource to the district. Properties must be listed or certified eligible for listing on the New Jersey or National Registers by August 3rd, 2026. If you are applying for a capital grant and your resource is not listed individually or as a contributing resource to the historic district on either the New Jersey or National Registers, you must provide the date of the State Review Board meeting where your resource is scheduled for review. The resource must be listed in order to receive grant funding. Now, before we move on, I'm going to pass it off to Glenn to discuss houses of worship.
Thanks, Judy. I know many people have had questions regarding the eligibility of churches for our grants. Here is some background and what I know to date. Back in 2018, the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled that state tax dollars cannot be used to repair or maintain houses of worship. Doing so would violate the New Jersey Constitution. However, in 2024, a ruling by a U.S. District Court judge in New Jersey stated that you can't deny a church from applying for a grant simply because it is a religious institution. What is unclear under this ruling is what type of project can be funded with grant funds. The ruling indicates that some projects may be eligible for funding so long as that project is not seen as inherently religious or it is not funding purely religious iconography. Unfortunately, neither of these things were specifically defined within that considered ruling. About 10 days ago, the 2024 preliminary injunction became permanent. At this point, we don't know the specific impacts, if any, of this permanent injunction on our grant program. That's currently under review. So what this does mean, though, to you, if you're considering to apply to the Historic Trust for a grant, is if your project is in an active house of worship, you are eligible to apply as long as you meet all of our other grant requirements. Your application or project will be reviewed to determine if that project, that specific project, is or is not in compliance with existing law. If it is determined to be compliant, then the application will be considered along with all the other applications we received. If it's determined not to be compliant, then the application will no longer be considered for this grant round. Once we have a better understanding of the most recent ruling, we will post any additional information or guidance on our website. If you feel like you may fall within this category, you may want to review the rulings. There are links to these documents on our website under the frequently asked questions page to see if your project would be impacted by these rulings. Now, this only applies to active houses of worship. This will not apply to buildings that have functioned at one point in time as a church, but now is a museum, community center, or serves as some other purpose. That law only refers to active houses of worship. Again, unfortunately, we're not able to give a very definitive answer on whether all projects can be funded under a grant program, but everyone is, again, eligible to apply, and we will review it based on the law as we know it. And I'm hoping that, again, with this, again, it was only 10 days ago that this preliminary injunction became permanent, and what the ramifications of that are. Once we know that, hopefully we'll be able to provide additional guidance to those of you who are hoping to get grant funds for houses of worship. So that's the latest we know. Unfortunately, like I said, it's not definitive at this point. But again, if you do have a house of worship, historic house of worship, and you want to apply, you definitely are eligible. But we'll look at each individual project, again, specifically to see how it relates to the rulings that have come down to date. So that's what we have on funding of churches. Now, Judy, I'll pass it back to you in the next slide, I think.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. In order to determine if a property is eligible for a grant, we need to see documentation. If the property is already listed, please include a copy of the National or New Jersey Register nomination form. If your resource is not listed, but has been certified eligible for listing, you will need to provide the letter of eligibility from the State Historic Preservation Office. All properties must be either listed or certified eligible for listing in the New Jersey or National Register by August 3rd, 2026. And again, if you are applying for a capital grant, the resource must be listed by August 3rd. If not, you will need to provide the date of the State Review Board meeting showing it is scheduled for review. Okay, eligible activities. They vary dependent on the specific grant type. So this list you see in front of you is broken down by grant type, is by no means comprehensive list. It's just some examples of the types of projects we see most often. We have things like preservation plans and archaeological surveys under our historic site management grants, preparation of local historic preservation ordinances under our municipal, county, and regional planning grants, interpretive planning under our heritage tourism grants, and preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, archaeological surveys, and reconstruction work under our capital grants. My colleagues will be going into greater detail about eligible activities for each grant type later in the presentation, and you can find a more comprehensive list in our grant guidelines on the website. If you have any questions or concerns about whether or not your particular project would be eligible, you can give us a call at the Trust and we'd be happy to discuss it with you. And again, just as a reminder, please make sure that when you're filling out your application, you've chosen the correct application type for your project. While there are some different requirements and criteria depending on the grant type you're applying for, there are some criteria that are consistent across all of them. The first being the significance of the resource. We look to see what the listing status is, whether it's on the New Jersey Register of Historic Places, National Register of Historic Places, or a National Historic Landmark. We also want to know if the resource is under threat of collapse, demolition, inappropriate use, or development. The next criteria we look at is the project concept and team. This is where we ask questions like, is the scope of work clear, thorough, and appropriate for the resource? Is the project team qualified? Is the proposed budget realistic? And is the schedule feasible? The third category is organizational ability. This is where we want to know about the organization itself, its long-term commitment to the preservation of the resource and fundraising ability. We also want to know if the matching funds are available, and if not, what is your fundraising plan? These questions help us determine whether the applicant organization is a good steward of the resource and if they can manage grants effectively. The final category is public access and benefit, where we want to see how the project involves and supports the local community. Some questions we ask here are, does the project represent innovative design, programming, or reach new audiences? Does the project complement other state initiatives? Is there community support? And will funding make a difference in the quality of the project? I would also like to add that community support is extremely important and is something that our evaluators really like to see. We highly recommend that applicants reach out to their legislators, local government officials, other nonprofits, or any other community members to obtain letters of support for the project. You'll want to make sure to include this in your application. And lastly, I want to touch upon the grant types we'll be offering this year. The minimum and maximum award for each type and the matching requirement for each type. This is just a basic overview. Further details will be provided later in the presentation. If you have questions, you should wait until we get to the section on that individual grant type. Our historic site management, heritage tourism, and municipal, county, and regional planning grants all have the same bracket of grant request and match. The minimum request amount is $5,000 and the maximum is $75,000. And the trust will provide up to 75% of the grant funded project. For our capital level 1 grants, there is a minimum request amount of $5,000 and a maximum of $150,000. And the trust will provide up to 60% of the grant funded project. Our capital level 2 grants have a minimum request of $150,001 and a maximum of $750,000, and the trust will provide up to 50% of the grant funded project. And lastly, our capital level 3 multi-phase grants have a minimum request of $500,000 and a maximum of $750,000 per phase, and there must be at least 2 phases, and the trust will provide up to 50% of the grant funded project. Now, before I pass this along, do we have any questions?
There's one question so far from John, who asks, is there a specific amount of funding set for those that meet the special initiative categories?
No, we don't set aside a certain amount of dollars for special initiative projects. It's just something that is considered when we're looking at all of the projects. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'm going to pass this over to our staff archaeologist, Alexis, who will take us through the archaeological requirements.
Thanks, Judy. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexis Alamy, and I'm a program officer as well as the Trust staff archaeologist. I'm going to briefly review the archaeological requirements of trust-funded projects. So determining whether some level of archaeological survey should be included within your project must begin with consideration for archaeological resources. To do this, you'll need to first consider what is being planned for and how it intersects with the archaeological sensitivity of the site. Surveys recommended when there's a high potential for archaeological resources and the proposed project has the potential to impact those resources. Sites that are eligible for funding through the New Jersey Historic Trust Grant Program often retain the characteristics which indicate a high potential for encountering archaeological resources, such as proximity to water resources, soil drainage types, and proximity to mapped or existing historic roadways or structures. This is why considering archaeological resources and their management is a required component of applications for funding. Archaeological surveys may consist of a reconnaissance level survey, which is known as a Phase 1A, identification level field testing, which is known as a Phase 1B, an evaluation level survey called a Phase 2, full data recovery known as a Phase 3, or archaeological monitoring during construction. The choice of action may depend in part on the severity of the proposed ground disturbing activity, as well as its potential to disturb significant sites and/or artifacts. Each level of survey involves historic research and usually some level of subsurface testing. The Trust recommends that property owners and managers consider a phased, proactive approach to archaeological investigations, which should be planned for and executed well in advance of ground disturbing activity taking place. Long-term, the most efficient and cost-effective means of incorporating archaeology into the preservation strategy of a site is through the initial implementation of a Phase 1 survey. Surveys like this will result in reports describing background research, investigative findings, a site sensitivity model, and site management recommendations. From here, more targeted evaluations may be completed as needed at the Phase 2 or 3 level. By starting with a broad survey, you can avoid potentially having to undertake multitudes of highly targeted, smaller scale investigations that could become financially burdensome and ultimately archaeologically complicated. An archaeological management plan may also be prepared, which, like a preservation plan, will offer guidance for overall preservation efforts, address specific archaeological needs, and help to guide future development on site. This will entail a comprehensive survey of the site, including a summary of all previously completed archaeological work, and will result in a determination of site sensitivity and potential next steps. Often, archaeological management plans incorporate a similar level of effort as a Phase 1 survey. I want to note here that archaeological monitoring is not the same thing as phased survey. Archaeological monitoring is the observation of ground disturbance by a qualified professional archaeologist during construction. Keep in mind that the decision to use monitoring as an approach must be made in collaboration with a qualified professional archaeologist and should be based on the results of previously completed assessments of the site. The archaeological requirements associated with your prospective project will vary according to a number of variables, so we encourage you to get in touch with our office to discuss your projects in more detail and to receive guidance more specific to your project. That said, you should note that archaeological investigations are eligible activities for both planning and capital grant applications. So we know that many historic site management grants involve activities that lay the groundwork for future capital endeavors. You may be required to address archaeology in some of your work products, including within preservation plans, construction drawings and specifications, planning documents that outline future ground disturbing activities, and a variety of other documents. At a minimum, planning documents are required to acknowledge potential archaeological resources and their future treatment. The extent to which archaeology may need to be addressed will vary on a site-by-site and project-specific basis, but a good rule of thumb is that if there is ground disturbance planned for the current project or for future projects, you should consider how you might address the known or potential archaeological resources that could be affected by it. Archaeology must be taken into consideration prior to engaging in ground disturbing activities, and archaeological investigation, if required, must therefore be planned and budgeted for well in advance. Apart from the incorporation of archaeology into the preservation strategy of your site and for planning purposes, there are situations where the consideration of archaeological resources is a requirement of trust funding. Even if the primary goal of your project is not an archaeological survey, you're required to consider archaeology if you have any ground disturbing activities planned. You'll see some examples of the kinds of activities that have required archaeological consideration in past trust projects here on the screen, such as the excavation of trenches for utility service and site drainage, excavation related to ADA site improvements, and the construction or expansion of walkways, driveways, and parking areas. And to clarify, consideration does not necessarily mean excavation or even formal survey. Consideration should start with an assessment of whether ground disturbance is included in the project, the nature of that ground disturbance, and whether the proposed project area has been disturbed previously and to what extent. Having found the answers to those questions, attention should then turn to archaeology. If it's unknown whether archaeological resources are present within the project area, and the project area has characteristics suggesting there is a high potential for encountering them, archaeological survey may need to be planned for depending on the nature of the proposed project. Ensuring that adequate time and funding have been included to allow archaeological investigations to be conducted to professional standards will ultimately strengthen your application. If you've determined that you will include an archaeological survey within your project, it's recommended that you consult with a qualified professional archaeologist and solicit a proposal for services from them, which outlines the scope of work, costs, and timeline for completing that work, and should be incorporated within your grant application. In the past, we've seen applications that include monitoring as a sort of umbrella term, or that state that archaeology will be incorporated as needed, which really isn't sufficient for a competitive grant program. The evaluators are looking for accurate proposals for all project components, including archaeology, that demonstrate a complete understanding of the project. And from a financial perspective, it benefits you to have actual costs in hand when you submit your application, because the numbers submitted in your application are going to be used to calculate the eligible grant award for the project. Additionally, please remember that archaeology often occurs in phases. Performing an initial phase of research and field testing may yield the conclusion that additional survey is needed. This is why it's of critical importance that archaeology is addressed early. So just as an example, we had a project a few years back where the grantee ensured that a phase 1 archaeological survey was completed, which was great, but they then neglected to incorporate the recommendations made in that final report. And those recommendations included additional survey. So they began construction assuming that monitoring was acceptable, but because additional survey was required, construction was halted so that that additional investigation could occur. So as you can imagine, the time and budgetary setback incurred due to this oversight was sizable and avoidable. So just let that be a cautionary tale to plan early and well for archaeology. And if you're unsure what level of investigation is most appropriate for your project, please don't hesitate to reach out to me before you finalize your application. I'm happy to work with you as you plan for your project's needs. And just a note on archaeological survey and reporting requirements. Fortunately, New Jersey regulations provide a pretty specific set of guidelines for completing surveys, and the Historic Preservation Office also maintains guidelines for preparing cultural resource management reports, which are consistent with both the Secretary of the Interior standards as well as the New Jersey Register Act rules. Direct links to each of these documents can be accessed through the fact sheets on the New Jersey Historic Trust website, and I'm happy to provide them directly to you at any point. There are live links embedded in this presentation as well, which you'll be able to access through the PDF version. All phases of archaeological survey are required to be in keeping with these guidelines and regulations appropriate to the level of investigation being undertaken. Additionally, work must be completed by individuals meeting or exceeding the professional qualification standards for archaeology outlined by the Secretary of the Interior. I also want to take a moment to remind you that you might consider whether undertaking a program of public archaeology might be appropriate for your site and project. Taking the opportunity to share the archaeology on your property with the people who visit and love it can be a great way to increase public engagement at your site. We've seen a number of successful public archaeology projects here at the Trust that have resulted in the collection of interesting data as well as increased site visitation. Depending on the scope of the archaeological investigation you'll be undertaking, archaeology can be used as a training opportunity as well, which could allow for collaboration with local professional archaeologists and universities. And of course, whether public archaeology becomes a component or not, undertaking an archaeological investigation will provide new insight into your site's history and add to your understanding of its use and development over time. And finally, I just want to point out that we have a number of fact sheets available on the Trust website, which are related to a variety of topics, including archaeology. These are a useful reference outlining some of the requirements for completing archaeological surveys in accordance with the laws, regulations, and standards that are associated with Trust funding. You can find these fact sheets and more at the web address shown on the slide under the heading Guidelines and Fact Sheets. And in closing, I want to emphasize again that we're always happy to meet with you to discuss your prospective projects in more detail and to answer any questions you may have. And if you have any archaeology-specific questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. You'll find my contact information at the end of the presentation. Are there any questions about this section?
There's one question at the moment from John, who asks, is the survey required if no ground disturbance will be performed?
No, if you're not planning to do any ground disturbing activity as part of your grant-funded or grant application, then a survey is not required, though we do recommend that you consider the future archaeological needs of your resource.
No other questions.
All right, well, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Shannon.
All right, thank you, Alexis. As she said, my name is Shannon Bremer, and I'm going to be discussing our historic site management or HSM applications. So although they are separate application types, meaning our HSM, our municipal, county, and regional planning, and our heritage tourism applications, they do share many similar components. So if you're planning on applying for any of the grants I just listed, I do recommend that you pay close attention to the information I'll be detailing in this portion of the workshop. Then later on, my colleagues will explain the sections of the applications that are different for our MCRP, our Municipal County Regional Planning application, as well as our Heritage Tourism applications as well. Just a reminder to everyone that each application type does have its own application with different program-specific questions. So please make sure when you're selecting your application that you select the correct application type that you're applying for. So some eligible activities for our HSM grants include construction documents and non-construction activities related to planning for preservation or rehabilitation of a historic property. This includes things such as preservation plans, as well as historic structure reports, feasibility studies, structural evaluations, archaeological studies, and historic landscape plans. Other fundable activities can include the preparation of nominations for the New Jersey Register or the National Register, organizational strategic plans, and HABS HARE-HALS documentation. Additional activities eligible for funding can be found in the grant guidelines. And if you do not see a project type listed that you think you might be interested in doing and eligible, please contact a program officer and they'll be able to guide you and let you know if it's eligible. Our HSM grants provide a 3-to-1 funding match. So this means that the trust provides up to 75% of the total project cost, and the applicant provides 25% of the total project cost. So for example, if your total project cost is going to be $60,000, your grant request would be for $45,000, meaning that your required match would then be $15,000. You do not need to have your full match in hand at the time of application. However, all applicants should demonstrate the ability to provide the full match required to complete the project. Therefore, if you don't have your full match in hand, you should include details about your fundraising plan, such as planned fundraising events and other potential funding sources like local, county, or federal grants. There are a few requirements that you should be aware of before applying for our HSM grant. The first of these requirements is the owner approval is required if the applicant does not own the property. The only exception to this is if the project you're applying for is a historic district nomination. In that case, the owner approval form would just need to be signed by the chief elected official of each municipality that falls within the boundaries of the proposed project area, not by the individual owner of each property within the boundary of the proposed district. The next requirement is that your resource must be listed or certified eligible for listing on the New Jersey or National Registers of Historic Places by August 3rd, 2026. If you plan on pursuing capital funds from us in the future, please note that it is required that you be listed on the state or national register to receive funding. All work must be completed within the 2 years after funds are appropriated. We also require that all grantees acknowledge the funding assistance in all published materials. Next, we will go through each part of the HSM application. These sections are all the same as last year. So our revised application is divided into 10 sections: eligibility statements, applicant information, property ownership, resource information and historic significance, climate change, project concept and team, archaeology, which is one of our newer sections, the project budget, organizational ability, and public access and benefit. Our sections that focus on our evaluation criteria are the resource information and historic significance, project concept and team, the project budget, organizational ability, and public access and benefit. While the whole application should be prepared by someone who really knows your project and organization, it is extraordinarily important for the sections that match our evaluation criteria. One thing I would like to note is that we have adjusted and changed some of our word counts in the application, so please be aware of your word counts as you fill out each question. If you go over the word count, FormSite will only accept the words up to the limit and will remove any words afterwards. So the first section of the grant application is very straightforward. This section is the eligibility statements, which establish whether or not your organization and resource are eligible for our grant funding. The next section is applicant information. This is where you will list your organization information, including your primary contact for the project. This is the person that our program officers will be reaching out to in order to arrange an application site visit. The contact listed should be very familiar with the project and able to answer any questions about project details that staff may have upon their application site visit. If you are one of the fortunate people to receive a grant, this is also who we will contact in the future. So make sure whoever it is somebody that you want all future information to go to. If you are a nonprofit, you will need to provide your IRS 501c determination letter, as well as your New Jersey charitable registration number. All applicants must submit a governing body/board resolution and assurances form. This designates the person who will sign application documents, as well as certifies the matching funds. We do provide a sample in our application. However, municipalities and local governments may also use their own resolution forms. The purpose of this document is to authorize the application as well as the exact amount of grant request and the matching funds to be provided. Our property ownership section confirms whether the applicant owns the property or properties. An owner approval form is only required when you, the applicant, do not own the subject property of the application. Again, as I mentioned before, if your application is for a historic district nomination, the owner approval form would need to be signed by the chief elected official of each municipality that falls within the boundaries of the proposed project area, not by the individual owner of each property within the boundary of the proposed district. Next up is the resource information and historic significance. So this is where you will tell us about your resource. We ask that you use the historic name for the property as it's listed by the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office. To determine what name to use, you can check out the section labeled Identify on their website. You can also check out Lucy, which is another way that you can find project resource names for the historic properties. If your project includes more than one property, you will have to choose one as your reference property. You will be able to list all of the properties in a separate question. We will also ask you for the physical property address, as well as a Google Maps link, as this is what we use to locate the property when we come out for our site visit. Next, we ask for the historic register status of the resource, including whether it is listed individually or as contributing to a district. If your property is not already listed on the National or New Jersey Register, please remember that it needs to be certified eligible by the State Historic Preservation Office by August 3rd. This is a hard deadline, and we will not accept certificates of eligibility after that deadline. If you do not currently have a certificate of eligibility for your site, we recommend that you start the process immediately in order to be able to meet that deadline. If you're unsure if you have a certificate of eligibility already, or if you have any questions about the process, please reach out directly to the Historic Preservation Office. The Historic Preservation Office currently has a backlog, so it's imperative that you start this process as soon as humanly possible if you need a certificate of eligibility. Next, we ask you to look at your New Jersey Register, National Register, or Certificate of Eligibility and identify which criteria of significance your resource or district meets. We also ask you to briefly explain the significance as it pertains to or is not covered by the criteria. We've also added a general historic significance question where you'll be able to have the opportunity to briefly explain the significance of your resource and tell us why it's important to preserve. In this section of the application, we will also ask you about the historic and current uses of the property, as well as any future plans that you may have for the site. You also have the opportunity to explain how the property has evolved to meet the changing needs of the resource. Ownership and applicant history is where we want to know when and how you acquired the property, either through ownership or lease. We also want to know if your property is endangered, meaning are there any threats to your resource? This could be anything from past neglect and poor stewardship to structural concerns and threat of demolition or development. So whether you believe in climate change or not, it's no secret that extreme weather events have been happening in New Jersey and have the potential to affect your historic resource. As a result, we expanded our application questions to help both applicants and us understand the hazards that may affect your resource in this new age. We ask questions about how you are planning for climate change, such as if you are creating a mitigation plan or if you're planning any site changes to promote better drainage. We ask that you take a look at the risk index map to identify the hazards that may impact your site. And in case anyone was wondering, it is unlikely that your site will be impacted by a volcanic event, but it is a risk anyway. In addition, we provide resources that help you identify if your property is in a flood zone, as well as a follow-up question about if your property has any flood insurance. For our MCRP application, we do want to know if your community participates in the National Flood Insurance Program. In addition, we also ask if you or anyone in your organization is staying up to date on the happenings in the climate change world by attending any climate change related events. Since we know that many will want more information, we do include links within the application to take you to reputable websites, and we created a resource guide that follows along with the climate change application questions that will be posted on our website under the resource tab. As always, if you have any questions or concerns about this section, contact a staff member and we'll be able to help guide you. Next up is the project concept and team section. You'll be able to select all of the activities included in the project, as well as provide us with a project summary and how the project will be innovative or exemplary. We ask for the current status of the project, including whether you have selected a consultant or if you are preparing a request for proposals. If you have selected your consultants, please make sure you submit their resumes and their credentials as well as their proposal for completing the scope of work. If you are preparing an RFP, you will need to include a description of the qualification you are looking for in a consultant. You do not have to submit a completed or final RFP. Draft RFPs are absolutely acceptable. Finally, you will also need to include professionally prepared cost estimates. So we've also included a section specific to archaeology. Here we hope to get a sense of how archaeology has been incorporated into the preservation strategy of your site. We ask for information regarding previous archaeological investigations that have occurred on site, if any, as well as whether projects involving ground disturbance are currently planned or are being considered. This is all aimed at allowing us to understand how known or potential archaeological resources are being incorporated within either your current project plans or your long-term plans for your site. Not all projects will require the inclusion of archaeological investigation. If yours does not, due to a lack of proposed ground disturbance, the preparation of a planning document that does not require a formal investigation in its scope, or the results of a previous archaeological survey, to name a few examples, please be sure to describe this within the section of the application. This is also a great place to let us know if you haven't yet had a need for formally considering archaeology, that you may be able to consider it in the future. In the project budget section, you will give us a detailed list of work products as well as their associated costs. You will also identify the total project cost, the amount of your grant request, as well as the match required to complete your project. We also ask how much of your match you have in hand and the remaining match needed. Examples of eligible matches include monies fundraised by the organization, county grants, federal grants, and municipal budgets, just to name a few. The only ineligible match for our grants is other corporate business tax funding. There is no match expended for our HSM grants, meaning any work completed prior to the application deadline is not eligible. If you choose to move forward with your project after the application deadline, you can. However, please remember that there are no guarantees that you will be awarded a grant. If you do choose to move forward, you should keep the program officer assigned to your application in the loop to ensure that you're following all of our program requirements. If you're a nonprofit, you should submit account statements or funding commitments as proof of your available funds. This should be submitted with attachment F under organizational ability. If you are a county/municipal entity, the governing body board resolution and assurances committing specific matching funds will serve as your documentation. In organizational ability, we are looking for information about your organization, such as its size and mission statement. We want to know if you have a cyclical and long-term maintenance plan for your property, who is responsible for routine maintenance, if you have a maintenance fund, and if there are any planning documents that support those decisions. We also want to know what experience your organization has with managing grants and working with consultants. You will need to identify who from your organization will be managing this grant and providing project oversight. This also includes identifying all prior grants that person has managed, as well as if the applicant organization has experience working with consultants or contractors. You also have an opportunity to show any preservation-related continuing education and professional development activities that have been attended by your staff, board, volunteers, or project team in the past 2 years. If you have any open grants with the trust, you will be asked to identify them and when they are projected to be completed. If applicable, please explain how you plan to raise the remaining matching funds for the project or any additional preservation efforts. As mentioned before, this is where you will attach your operating budget/balance sheet if you're a nonprofit. So the final section of the application is public access and benefit. This is where you will talk about how your resource is interpreted to the public, how it currently assesses the needs of the preservation of the community, as well as how it plans to do so in the future. We want to know if you are open to the public on a regular basis and what your current operating hours are. If you collect visitation numbers, you can absolutely share those with us and include it. This section is also where we ask about our special initiatives, as well as any state and federal heritage initiatives. There are links to all of the listed initiatives, including certified local governments, listing on our Journey Through Jersey website, Main Street Communities, and New Jersey Women's Heritage Trail, to name a few. If you participate in any of the listed initiatives, please make sure you check the box for it in this section. If you do not include it in the application, the evaluators may not know that you participate in these initiatives. And with that, I see that we have a bunch of questions.
Yeah, there's 7 questions right now. The first is Mary wants to know, for matching funds, do we need to raise money specifically restricted to this project or application, or can the funds be taken from reserves we already have?
They can absolutely be taken from reserves you already have. We just require that you obviously show us, some kind of proof. So if you're a nonprofit, you're showing your account statements showing that you have, those matching funds in hand. If you're a municipality, making sure that your governing body resolution is certifying those funds. That's really all we ask, is just that there's documentation of the fact that you actually have the funds.
Amy asks, can a municipality and a nonprofit partner? I ask because in my case, the municipality will be applying, but the nonprofit has the contact person who knows the most about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that we've seen before. Typically what will happen, in at least in the case that I've personally worked with where this has been a situation, the municipality has served for all intent and purposes as the applicant, and is still involved in the conversations. Um, but the nonprofit partner, is also there as like a communication person and to kind of help with guidance. Um, Ultimately, when it comes down to what it will come down to is during the award process, if this grant is awarded, and recommended for funding, the municipality would be the one that would be, front and center on the grant agreement. They would be the one that would only be eligible for reimbursement. So all funding and money spent would have to go through them essentially.
John asks, how much of the budget should be dedicated to climate change preparation?
That is a great question. Um, I think it's important to consider, obviously, what exactly you're applying for when you're considering how much should be delineated in your budget if you're talking specifically about your independent project. If you're doing something like a preservation plan, obviously, you would want to make sure that the preservation includes something about your climate change preparations, and maybe they would delineate, how much of your annual budget should go towards some of that preparation in it. Um, but you can also speak with a program officer directly for more specific guidance based off of your project.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in a little bit too here, Shannon. Again, what Shannon's been going over, all been planning type documents. So again, these are documents that are going to help, perhaps a future construction project and stuff like that. So I think to answer John's question, I think it's site specific. If you have lots of trees around your site, perhaps, yeah, you're doing some sort of tree maintenance survey as well. If you're next to a creek or other water source that might flood, okay, you're adding that to your preservation plan to make sure that that's being addressed. So I think to some degree, your project and your site is going to dictate how much of that plan needs to be dedicated to climate change.
James and Sue have similar questions. So they ask, can you provide more detail on what you mean by hazards that have the potential to affect the resource? Is there a threshold? And are medium risk also to be listed or only high risk threats?
I'm going to jump in again, Shannon, here.
Yeah, go for it.
The I think a source for actually everyone to look at if you are preparing either a historic structure report or a preservation plan is the Historic Structure Report and Preservation Plans Preparation Guide, second edition that the State Historic Preservation Office and Trust put together a few years ago. That actually outlines specifically what we mean by these various hazards or vulnerabilities, stuff like that. I think your question probably be answered by that. But again, what the intent is, again, and this is to be addressed within that preservation plan or HSR, is to make sure that you're taking into consideration that there might be a hazard. Your historical society is 2 doors down from a gas station. Well, that's a potential hazard. So that, again, you're identifying stuff like that within your preservation plan, just so that it's just things that you want to be able to consider that something might happen and be prepared for if it does. But again, I recommend going to, and I know we have this link on our website too, but the Historic Structure Reports and Preservation Plans, a preparation guide, will, I'm sure, answer your questions more thoroughly.
And just to kind of add to that, as it relates specifically to the climate change portion of our application, I believe there's my colleague Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong on this because she's our specialist on climate change. There is a risk index map I think the link is included in the application that you would check out. I recommend putting, risks that are medium to high risk for your site, given that those are the ones that would potentially have the greatest impact. So I hope that that kind of answers both James and Sue's questions together from two different perspectives.
Okay. David asks, will a certified eligible contributing property within a historic district require formal SHPO listing prior to funding and/or HSM project start or finish?
So, sorry, I'm just rereading it. So if it's certified eligible as a contributing property within a historic district, that's acceptable for an HSM. We obviously would need the letter with the application, stating having its certificate of eligibility. Um, as long as it's certified eligible, and that property is distinctly listed in that certificate of eligibility, then you are A-okay. Don't have to worry about it, especially for the HSM. It only comes into play when then you're going forward for capital work. If end up applying for capital work, then obviously it would need to be, the district would then have to be listed, or the independent resource would have to be listed on its own, before you can receive funds.
Okay. Hans asks, are there any examples or templates that could be reviewed to help prepare an RFP, a request for proposals? We're planning to work with a historic preservation architect firm to complete our site preservation study.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe we have an example of an RFP on our website, if I'm not mistaken. Um, if we do not, then what I recommend is reaching out to a staff person, or to our central email when you see all of that information at the end of our presentation. And we do have templates that we could provide as well.
Kate asks, are state colleges and universities eligible to apply?
As long as you are either a state, municipal, or county entity, and you are not privately owned, or you are a 501c, then you are an eligible applicant.
Okay. Rosemary asks, we are a nonprofit 501c3 who manages the day-to-day operations of a historic building owned by the school district. Who should be applying for the grant, the school district or the nonprofit?
Um, I Personally, for this one, I would recommend reaching out specifically to a staff person to go over your specific situation. Um, Typically, what we'll see is either the 501c3 will apply, but they have to have specific verbiage in their lease, giving them permission to apply for grants to do the work. If you don't have that incorporated in your lease, if your lease does not give you that permission, to actually do any work on your property, do any projects that go toward the preservation of the building, um, then by default, the school district would probably be the better one to apply, unless your lease can be adjusted within the time frame that you would need to provide that to us. So by the August 3rd deadline. I hope that answered the question.
And Heather asks, what if you have a landmark that's in dire need of attention in a historic district that's in dire condition, but the historical board currently, due to lack of participation and passing of former members? That's the end of the question.
I
Maybe
is no
maybe
longer
that's
functioning.
yeah, maybe that's if the board can't sign off. Oh, yeah.
If that's actually a great question, Glenn. I may tap you actually for some help on this one.
Well, again, it partly depends on who owns the landmark. Is it privately owned? Is it owned by the municipality? Even if it doesn't have a current, historic preservation commission, I'm assuming that's what you mean by historical board. Again, the municipality itself can apply if they own the building. But if they don't, if it's privately owned, and there's no municipal or nonprofit with a lease, I don't see them how they could be a eligible applicant at that point in time. But again, perhaps a little bit more detail, perhaps reaching out to one of our program officers, and we could discuss those specifics. But it comes down to who's going to own the building, whose project is it.
Well, we'll save that. Those are all the questions for now.
But
Okay.
Actually, there are more.
Oh, we were going to save them for the capital section.
Great. All right. And then I'm going to turn it over to Olivia, who's going to talk more about our MCRP grants.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivia Chaudhary, and I will give an overview of the Municipal, County, and Regional Planning, or MCRP grants. Looks like our screen is still loading. Perfect. Oops, I lost my place when I clicked away from the window. Here we are. So for the MCRP grants, there are four major eligible activities: preparation of design guidelines, preparation or revision of local historic preservation ordinances, preparation of historic preservation components to a municipal or county master plan, and the preparation of an architectural survey to identify historic properties using the State Historic Preservation Office's approved guidelines and format. If you're applying for one of these four activities, be sure to complete the MCRP application and not the HSM application. If you are proposing a planning document or activity other than what we've mentioned here, please reach out to Judy Murphy to determine if it is an eligible activity. The MCRP application is quite similar to the HSM application, but there are some different sections. This slide shows all of the components of the MCRP application. The sections in black, which are applicant information, climate change, project budget, and archaeology, are similar to the HSM application. The sections in red have some differences, and those will be discussed shortly. The MCRP applications are evaluated for resource information and historic significance, project concept and team, project budget, organizational ability, and public access and benefit, which we will also discuss in more detail soon. Here are the major differences between the HSM and MCRP applications. For property ownership, MCRP grants do not need to demonstrate ownership of the project area, but the municipal consent form requires the signature of the chief elected official of each municipality in which the project area is located. For resource information and historic significance, the project area must contain at least one resource that is listed or certified eligible for listing in the New Jersey State or National Register of Historic Places. The resource must be either individually listed or as a contributing resource in a historic district. In this section, you must identify previous and current preservation planning efforts of the community, as well as any existing preservation planning documents, including their dates of adoption. For project concept and team, you must detail the local historic preservation commission, if one exists, in addition to information on the proposed consultants for the project. For organizational ability, you will identify any stakeholder groups involved with the project, such as historical societies or Main Street organizations, and discuss how the project promotes stewardship and maintenance of historic resources by private owners. For public access and benefit, you will detail how much community involvement and support there is for the project, if the project will increase awareness of the community's history, and how the project will increase community participation in ongoing preservation efforts. All MCRP applications will be reviewed based on the following criteria. These review standards are similar to the criteria for HSM applications, with the exception of 3. Those 3 criteria are the degree to which the project promotes stewardship and maintenance of historic resources by private owners, and the degree to which the project fosters the goals of the New Jersey Comprehensive Statewide Historic Preservation Plan, dated 2023 to 2028. And the third is the degree to which the applicant involves the community in the preservation process. The other 2 criteria, which are organizational ability and public benefit, are shared with the HSM application. We will segue into heritage tourism shortly, but before that, are there any questions on the MCRP application?
There aren't any questions on MCRP applications.
All right, thank you. And I will now turn it over to Ashley.
Hello, once again, my name is Ashley Parker, and I am a historic preservation specialist and the heritage tourism coordinator at the Trust. So now I'm going to discuss the heritage tourism application. So the heritage tourism application is once again very similar to the historic site management application, except for the following sections in red. This section will cover these differences and requirements for heritage tourism. These are some activities that we consider to be heritage tourism: visitor readiness assessments, visitor evaluation or development of performance evaluation measures, interpretive planning for one or multiple sites, and the development or enhancement of linkages between sites, design and fabrication of interpretive signage or literature. So in this case, we're not looking to replace existing brochures or signs, but rather the creation of new designs or fabrication. Marketing plans or studies, and training or workshops to create, foster, or enhance linkages between sites are all eligible activities. So this means you're hiring someone to speak, in regards to workshops, this means you're hiring someone to speak with your organization or several organizations within your community on a specific topic designated to enhance heritage tourism. So if there is something on this list that you have in mind that's not listed in the grant guidelines, you can contact me directly to determine if it's an eligible activity. So here we'll discuss some of the major differences between the historic site management application and heritage tourism. So although there are no ownership or lease requirements, if the applicant does not own the resource, they should demonstrate support for the project from the resource owners through the owner approval form, which will be under attachment B on your USB drive. For the property information and historic significance section, at least one resource must be listed or certified eligible in the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places, either individually or as a contributing resource in a historic district. If your project is for more than one property, choose a reference property that meets the property ownership and historic significance requirements. There is no climate change section to complete. And under the project concept and team, we ask that you check to make sure that the project is consistent with the New Jersey Heritage Tourism Master Plan and if it links to a broader regional heritage tourism initiative. With respect to public access and benefit, we want to know if your site is visitor ready. So for example, do you have regular hours, bathrooms, or a parking lot? If you are visitor ready, please provide documentation under attachment G on your USB drive. There is also a visitor readiness fact sheet that's available on our website under applicant resources for reference. All heritage tourism applications will be reviewed based on the following criteria. In addition to the criteria for review mentioned during the historic site management section, we will also take into consideration if the project enhances or benefits the visitor experience at the resources, fosters the goals and objectives in the New Jersey Heritage Tourism Master Plan, addresses the development of an existing heritage tourism plan, or if it aims to create a broader regional tourism plan. The applicant builds upon the proposal and continues to foster heritage tourism, has the potential to reach new audiences, has the potential to promote other cultural and heritage activities, and create links between multiple sites. So this concludes the heritage tourism section. Later in the presentation, Tara will review what is required in the attachment section and how to set your application apart. So I see no questions, so I'd like to turn the presentation over to my colleague Jennifer, who will now discuss the capital application.
Thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone. As Ashley said, my name is Jennifer. We will now discuss the Trust Construction Preservation Grants, also known as capital grants. And to note, even if you do not plan to apply for a capital grant at this time, we still encourage you to stick around during this section because your current project may lead to capital work in the future. In addition, there is a section following the capital section that is very informative about the attachments and how to set your application apart in this very competitive grant round. So, as you have already seen, each of our grant types have their own eligible activities, and capital is no different. For these capital grants, we can support both construction and non-construction activities. Eligible construction activities for this grant type include treatments such as preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Projects that include barrier-free access, interpretive signage, and project signs may also be eligible, and archaeology can be considered an eligible construction activity. In addition, new construction such as visitor amenities and compliance activities may also be eligible. For the non-construction activities, it's important to note that the budget for these activities within the capital grant program is limited to 20% of the total project budget. Remember that this is a capital grant to mainly support construction activities, so the expenses must be directly related to the construction. But for non-construction, eligible expenses can include consultant fees for planning, design, and construction administration, as well as construction documents, schematic designs, and specifications. And if you have any questions about whether or not your project includes eligible activities, please contact the trust staff because we are here to help. Now, there is a lot of important and sometimes confusing information on this slide, so I suggest you take a moment and screenshot it now for reference. The first trust grants are matching grants, as discussed. So your organization is responsible for providing funding proportionate to your grant type and award. For capital grants, there are 3 different levels with differing matching requirements. For Capital One grants with awards between $5,000 to $150,000, your organization is responsible for providing a 40% match. For example, if the total project cost is $100,000, the trust can provide up to $60,000, and the match that you would cover would be $40,000. For Capital Two grants with awards between $150,001 to $750,000, Your organization is responsible for providing a 50% match. For example, if your total project cost is $500,000, your grant award would be $250,000 with a match provided by you of $250,000. For capital or multi-phase grants with awards between $500,000 and $750,000, your organization is responsible for providing a 50% match. And this match is per phase of the grant. Now, please note that all these grant types, I use the terminology match to your grant award. If the project cost is greater than the grant plus your required match, your organization is still responsible for providing the remaining or actual matching funds to complete the project. The grant award cannot be increased. And to continue on matching funds, it is important to note that special state appropriations or monies derived from the corporate business tax, as discussed, are not eligible as matching funds. However, federal and county grants are eligible as a match. Last, as capital grants may be eligible for match expended, which is exclusive to this grant type. And match expended is money spent prior to this grant round that is an integral part of your capital project. So, yes, you can get started with your project now at your own risk, but there are limitations with match expended. Money spent prior to April 16th, 2024, 2 years before the application deadline, do not qualify as match expended. So anything spent towards your capital grant between April 16th, 2024 and April 16th, 2026, the application deadline, that meets SOI standards and gets a trust approval may be eligible for match expended. Match expended is also dispersed after the grant agreement is executed and a request for funds is made. In addition, match expended can be no more than 25% of your total project costs, and the 20% non-construction cost that we discussed still applies. If you do have match expended, a capital grant exclusive feature, please include the documentation in attachment E and get in contact with trust staff now to make sure your project is in compliance with the standards so that you can claim the match expended if awarded. So as with the previous grant types, we do have property ownership requirements, but add in a few more provisions for capital grants. For capital projects, the property must be owned in fee simple or leased by the applicant. If the property is leased, you must have the ability to make capital improvements included in the lease, and it must be at least 15 years left on the lease from the date of the grant funds are appropriated. If you do not have a 15 years on your lease, please include the joint signatory consent form with your attachment B alongside your lease agreement. For the project timetable, a grant agreement must be in effect within 18 months from the date of appropriation. So, since the appropriation bill was signed in December of this year, you would have until June of 2027, for example, to execute the grant agreement. In addition, capital work must begin within 2 years from the date of appropriation. So, have everything in order so that you can hit the ground running. Also, please note the audit requirements in the corner of this slide. Audits are required for entities receiving more than $350,000 combined from state or federal aid grants in a fiscal year. Audits are not reimbursable costs, and they must be completed by a licensed professional outside peer-reviewed auditor or auditing firm. Other capital grant requirements are listed on the slide. As stated, all proposed work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. If it does not, you will be ineligible for reimbursement. Next, capital reimbursements are different from other grant types, as in your reimbursement will be dependent on the amount you spend at the time of the request, minus a retainage fee that is withheld from each request. Again, a retainage fee is withheld from each capital reimbursement request, so you will not receive a dollar-for-dollar reimbursement for capital projects. In all, the retainage fee is equivalent to 5% of the grant award, and it will be dispersed to you at the close of the project once everything is reviewed and approved by the trust. And to take a step back, you must keep documentation of all your expenses in the form of invoices and canceled checks to apply for a reimbursement. In addition, to receive your first reimbursement, you must also provide documentary evidence that the trust temporary project sign is displayed on your property. The Capital Grant Manual can provide more information about the specifics for the sign. Now, if the property is owned by a nonprofit and the grant award is over $50,000, then we do require a preservation easement for the property with a term dependent on the grant award ranging from 15 to 30 years. The easement or deed restriction will go into effect at the close of the grant and will cover the portions of the resource in which grant funding was invested. The easement simply requires trust consultation for capital work during the full term of the easement. Lastly, at the close of the project, the trust requires the placement of a permanent sign or plaque, like the one pictured on the slide, for those projects awarded $50,000 or more. More information about the permanent marker can be found on the grant manuals, and discussions will take place with their program officer about the best method at the close of the project. And moving away from the general capital requirements and getting back into the actual application, on this slide you will see an outline of the application sections for the capital grants. While the sections are the same across the grants, the questions within the sections will differ slightly from the other applications, and we'll go through the information in a moment. In addition to the application sections, you will see the evaluation criteria to the right that our outside evaluators will use to review your applications. Please keep this information in mind as we go through each section of the capital application. Now for the application section review, the first section is the eligibility statements to determine if the grant program and grant type are appropriate for you and your organization at this time. And if you have questions about your eligibility, please contact trust staff. The next section is applicant information, which is about you and not the project. This is where you will list the point of contact for the grant. Please make sure this person is accessible and familiar with the project. Please also review the attachments checklist for specific documents to include. As a part of the property ownership section of the capital application, all applicants are required to answer questions about their ownership or lease status. Remember, you must have owner approval to be able to carry out the proposed project. Please review the attachments checklist for more information about what documentation to submit based on your ownership status. The next section is the resource information and historic significance section. This section is the first section that will be evaluated by our application reviewers. Please include the property name as listed by the State Historic Preservation Office. If there is more than one property, please choose one relevant property as the reference property. You will be able to list all properties in a separate question. Also include the physical property address and include a link to the location on Google Maps. Next, you will include the historic register status. For capital grants, please note that in order to be eligible for the Trust Grant Program, all properties must be listed by August 3rd, 2026. If your property is not yet listed in the New Jersey Register or National Register, but will be presented to the New Jersey State Review Board for historic sites prior to August 3rd, 2026 for final approval and listing, please include a letter from HPO acknowledging the status of your nomination. The State Historic Preservation Office can give you a fair assessment on the progress of your nomination, which will help you make an assessment if now is the time to apply for a trust grant. The next subsection will ask information regarding the historic significance of the resource, including the information included in the nomination, as well as the information that may not be covered by the nomination, such as underrepresented histories, for example. An additional question asks about the property's use in the past, in the present, and your future plans. We also ask how the property has evolved over time to meet its changing needs. Other questions include ownership and applicant history, as well as questions to evaluate the current needs of the property in terms of its general condition and possible threats to determine the preservation needs. There is even a newer question to describe the general context of the resource. The next section, jumping off of possible threats, is the section on climate change. We want to know how you are planning for climate change, what hazards, medium to high, to answer the question from before, that may impact your site. If you are in a flood zone and if you have flood insurance, as well as if you or someone in your organization is attending climate-focused events. If you need help with this section, examples are given in the questions. There's also a resource guide on the NJHT website with additional resources to help you answer these questions mindfully. So the next section is a project concept and team, which is another core evaluation section of the capital application. In this section, we are looking for a clear, concise, and detailed description of your proposed project and the qualifications of those that will be working on your project. So we ask questions regarding the goals of the project. And you will need to submit the scope of work Word document, as well as a budget worksheet in Excel form with this section of the application. We will ask about if this is a standalone project or part of a larger, possibly multi-phase project. We ask about the project specifics, such as where the project is focused and what types of non-construction activities are included in the project. You will also be required to answer questions regarding the project timetable, cost estimates, as well as the planning documents used to substantiate the proposed work. Now, it's important to note that the multi-phase application is a subcategory of the capital grant application. As a result, you will complete the same application as the other two capital grants, but additional questions will be generated when asked about the level of capital grant being applied for. Also, capital grant projects have a minimum of 2 phases with the request of at least $500,000 per phase of work. So the proposed project must be at least $2 million total with $1 million per phase to be eligible for this grant subcategory. Each phase must be substantially complete before funding for the next phase will be available. Funding for future phases is based upon future appropriations. So it is very important to keep your program officer up to date with your project progress so that you can receive your next grant in a timely manner. You don't have to reapply. Each phase must be individually outlined in your capital multi-phase budget worksheet Excel document. An example of the budget worksheet for the multi-phase projects is included on the screen. And note the information within the red box that requires a breakdown for each phase of the project. In addition to a worksheet for each phase, you must also submit a worksheet for the overall project. And within the capital application, there's also a section specific to archaeology. Here we hope to get a sense of how archaeology has been incorporated into the preservation strategy of your site. So we ask for information regarding previous archaeological investigations that have occurred on the site, if any, as well as other projects involving ground disturbance are currently planned or being considered. This is all aimed at allowing us to understand how known or potential archaeological resources are being incorporated within either your current project plans or your long-term plans for the site. But not all projects will require the inclusion of an archaeological investigation. And if yours does not, due to lack of proposed ground disturbance altogether, such as preparation of planning documents that don't require formal investigation in its scope or results of previous archaeological survey, please be sure to describe this within the section of the application. This is also a great place to let us know if you have not formally needed to consider archaeological resources that may lie within your site, if that is the case. The next section is the project budget. That includes questions about, you guessed it, your total project budget, as well as your matching funds to complete the project. We ask that you provide the total project costs based on the documentation from professional cost estimators or contractor proposals. In addition, please remember that your matching funds are dependent on the level capital grant you are applying, and that if the project cost is more than the grant funds, plus the required matching funds based on the grant type, your organization is responsible for closing that gap in funding. For example, if you are awarded a level 2 capital grant with an award of $750,000, the required match for the grant funded project is $750,000 for $1 million project. If the project is in excess of that 1.5 million, then the match required to complete the project would exceed the required 50% match, and you would be responsible for closing that gap. So please include documentation of your matching funds or information about how you will raise the remaining matching funds for the project if they are not already in hand already. And you can see the attachments checklist for information about which documents to provide. There's also a section where we ask about match expended and require documentation of these expended funds that occurred between April 16th, 2024 and April 16th, 2026. Any expenses that occur after the application deadline should simply be included in your proposed project cost in the application. Remember that all work must meet the SOI standards and be no more than 25% of your total project cost to be considered for match expended. To continue project budget, seen here is a capital project budget worksheet Excel document. You or your consultant must complete this worksheet in accordance with CSI divisions and are based on the cost estimates you receive. This spreadsheet must directly correspond with the capital scope of work Word document included in attachment D. Please remember that there are different tabs at the bottom of the page for each structure in each phase of work to be funded by the grant. The next key section of the application is the public access and benefit section. We want to understand when you are open, what your visitation is like, and are you accessible? How is your resource interpreted to the public? We also want to know other information, such as if your resource is currently located in a heritage initiative area, such as certified local government or Journey Through Jersey, to name a few. In addition, does your project meet the special initiatives? And if so, how? Also, again, note that there are two new initiatives. The key to this section is to let us know how this proposed project impacts the public access and or benefit of the resources visitors. And finally, from me in the capital application, the last section is about your organizational ability. Do you have the experience and know-how to manage the proposed project? We want to know information such as who works or volunteers within your organization and what their qualifications are. Do you have experience managing grants, whether they be of construction nature or not? Do you have experience working with consultants? Do you have a maintenance plan that you abide by? We also want to know if you or your staff have been to any educational or professional development events, such as the Trust conferences or the Rutgers March program. And with that, are there any questions about capital applications that I can answer before handing it off to Tara?
Okay, earlier Derek asked, are grants available for both interior and exterior projects?
Yes, grants are available for both interior and exterior.
Jeanette asked if churches can apply.
As Glenn stated at the beginning, yes, you can apply. We will need to carefully evaluate it along with the current legislation to figure out if it's something we can actually fund. And if Glenn, if you want to repeat that statement really quick.
Yeah, it's a matter of, we just need to look at the very specific project that you're proposing to see how it relates to the current law rulings that have come down through the courts. And again, we're still waiting to hear back. The most recent one from 10 days ago still being reviewed to see if that impacts stuff at all. But yes, churches can apply, but we will have to look at each individual project to see how it aligns with the law.
Okay. Michael asks, due to funding considerations, we will need to complete our project in phases. Do we then need to apply for a multi-phase grant?
Remember that multi-phase grants are dependent on that $1 million per phase. So $500,000 in grant funding provided by us, and then 500 provided by you. So if it meets that threshold and you have clear phases already planned out, then yes, a multi-phase application could be for you.
Sherilyn asks, I see that CLGs are a heritage initiative supported by this initiative. Would it be possible for a nonprofit to pursue a CLG grant to help with a capital or non-capital project? If so, who has done that?
You want me to jump in?
Yes, please.
I mean, CLG grants are certified local government grants, and they go to certified local government. So it's a grant is going to municipality through the State Historic Preservation Office. So you need to look at their rules as far as how that money can be spent. The big, I think, issue with that is the timing on that. Those grants tend to be 1 year in length, and trying to coordinate our grants with that. But not so much a nonprofit, but if municipality is coming in for a CLG, trying to team it up with one of our grants would be the more likely scenario than a nonprofit. But again, looking at this in the past, I mean, one of the big issues is this timing, because their grant program is a much shorter time frame because they're much smaller grants.
Sherilyn also asks, would a study of the economic benefits of preservation focusing on the preservation of affordable housing in historic districts and job generation like those developed before by Donovan Ripkema in large cities be an eligible topic for an MCRP grant?
The way I see that is if the municipality is trying to gather information for them to actually do affordable housing within their historic buildings and districts for a specific type of project, then it would be. If it's just a generic study to say, do we have stuff that would work with regards to affordable housing? Probably not. I think it'd have a very specific type of end goal in mind, that being they're trying to accommodate their affordable housing needs within historic properties.
Stan asks, for level 3 multi-phase, what is the maximum number of phases allowed?
So right now we don't have a maximum number of phases, but the most I've seen is 4. Just make sure your phases are very clear and they have at least that $1 million per phase minimum to them.
And Jen, I just want to hop in. The application right now is set up to accommodate a maximum of 5 phases. So if your project does exceed that, just give us a heads up.
Thank you, Ashley.
Richard asks, does the public access requirement track the easement period, and is internal access required if any internal improvements are made with grant funds?
So we do require public access for the term of the easement, if I'm understanding that correctly. And then if the internal improvements are made with the grant funds, we would like the public to be able to access it, but understand that some places are not accessible or code compliant. So there is wiggle room to that.
Sue asks, if a nonprofit applies for regranting on a county level, does it prevent application?
I think our normal grant program does not really deal with regranting. So, Sue, I think you should reach out to us directly. Maybe we could talk about your specific situation with regards to the county. But our general grants are not for regranting.
John asks, our site is open to the public for visitors and events throughout the year, but is not primarily for visitor access. Will this have any negative impact on our application?
Just explain your level of access in your application. Of course, we would like people to access the site, but understand that there are certain restrictions in terms of safety, code compliance. So it would depend on the way the public is able to interpret your site and its history.
I'll add to that, again, public benefit is a key criteria that the evaluators are looking at. So if it's not through them actually gaining access into the building, how are you addressing that public benefit? Are you doing other stuff through websites or other events that you're telling the story or showing maybe virtual access and stuff like that? So again, that public benefit is a key component to their criteria, so it should be addressed somehow within your application.
David asks, are organizational abilities information required for HSM applications?
Yes, we do have the organizational abilities section within the HSM application.
Richard asks, since the church never had to apply for a 501c3 determination letter but does so qualify, how would it prove its status without such a letter?
Personally, I've seen letters from depending on what type of religious organization it is, but from the Archdiocese. Glenn, I'm sure you have more experience with this than I do.
Yeah, we do need some sort of proof that you are, a 501c something or other. As you said, Jennifer, we've seen it for various religious institutions where they fall within the larger diocese or meeting or whatever it might be. And they're technically usually listed specifically on their letters. So there should be something there, but we do need some sort of proof that you are a 501c applicant.
And Stan asks, are applying for capital level 2 and capital level 3 considered separate and allowed?
If it's for the same building and if you have clearly differentiated phases of work, then it might be best to just apply for the capital level 3. If you're applying for 2 different buildings on the same site, talk to us and let us know, and we can talk through the project and see which application would be best.
And one more question. Joffrey asks, would a private 501c3 be required to provide public access to their historical building?
Again, we would like the public to be able to access the building, but there are restrictions. So we just want to know how your building is currently interpreted to the public as a part of that application section.
One more question. Gail asks, can you apply for only one grant a year?
No, you can apply for each one of our grants if that is what is currently going on with your site, but make sure you have clear, concise, and detailed projects for those applications, because it doesn't, just because you're awarded a capital grant doesn't mean you'd be awarded that HSM or vice versa. So make sure your applications are complete and relevant to what your site needs at this time.
And just the realities of a grant program that gets twice as much in requests as money's available. Again, it's the probability is always tough that if you're going to get multiple grants. But again, it's not that we haven't seen it happen before, but again, I think something to consider as well.
And if there are no more questions, then I would like to hand it off to Tara for the attachments.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Tara. I'm a preservationist here at the Trust. So thank you, everyone, for sticking with us today. We are nearing the end of the workshop, so stick around for just a bit longer. Okay, now we'll get into what should be included in the second part of your application, the USB attachments. Please note that if you have completed a Preserve New Jersey application in the past, some of the forms have consolidated or feature new names. Okay. Each application should have one corresponding USB with all of the attachments on it. So if you are applying for a capital grant and an HSM grant, you should have one USB for your capital application with all the relevant attachments and one USB for your HSM application with all of those relevant attachments. To make sure that all of your documents are reviewed by staff and the evaluators, please make sure to include a table of contents or a checklist of all the files included on the USB drive, and please make sure to organize your files as attachments A through H as you can see on your screen. It also helps if you double check and make sure that you are able to open all of your files. If you can't open it, then we can't open it either, and neither can our evaluators. So please double check your submission and be sure to note if it has all the relevant files for your application. In addition, any application received on a USB drive will not be reviewed. The USB is a separate part of your online application that must be delivered to the trust by 4 p.m. on April 16th. The materials you send to us must be in our hands by April 16th. If you are mailing your USB, we highly, highly, highly recommend sending it by certified mail or with tracking information to assure that it is received on time. I repeat, it must be into us by the 16th, not postmarked on the 16th. Any USB drive received after the application deadline will not be reviewed, and therefore your application will be considered incomplete. Okay, moving on to the table of contents. Again, please include a table of contents organized by attachment type that reflects the documents you include on your USB. There is no need to over-organize. Please place the proper materials into the proper attachments. The table of contents does follow the supporting document checklist that you will find a link to in your application. And please note that the attachments for each application vary slightly, so double check that you are reviewing and submitting the correct documents for your application. The first set of attachments is A, or the applicant information. If you are a nonprofit organization, please include your IRS 501c determination letter. All applicants are required to submit an applicant's governing body or board resolution and all assurances form, which outlines who in your organization is able to sign the grant documents and also authorizes that there are or will be matching funds available to complete your proposed project. Yes, it is a combined form now for those who have submitted applications in the past. And to note, this governing body board resolution and assurances form must be printed, signed by hand, not digitally scanned, and uploaded to the USB. For attachment B or property ownership section, any applicant who owns their resource can disregard this section. However, if you do not own your resource, you need to include your lease agreement and an owner approval form within attachment B on your USB drive. Please note that if you are applying for an MCRP grant or for a historic district nomination, you must have this form signed by the chief elected official of the municipality in which the district of your project is in. So, if the project overlaps community lines, you may need to submit multiple forms. Also, for capital projects, specifically if you do not own the resource and your lease term is less than 15 years, then you must have the owner of the property sign the joint signatory consent form, certifying that the owner of the property is an eligible applicant themselves and that they consent to be a cosigner on the grant. Okay, now for attachment C, resource information and historic significance. HSM, MCRP, or heritage tourism applicants must submit their most recent nomination form or their certificate of eligibility from the State Historic Preservation Office within attachment C on the USB drive. For capital projects, you must be listed in the state or national register individually or as a contributing resource to receive funding. So a copy of your nomination form must be submitted within USB attachment C. However, if your nomination is set to go before the State Review Board very soon, please submit an acknowledgement letter from the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office certifying that your nomination is nearing listing. If you have any questions about this policy, again, the trust staff is here to help you. Please contact us if you have any questions about that. In addition, if your project is considered a contributing resource to an eligible or listed historic district, please separate the pages relevant to the project's site. Or often we'll see highlights within the document to call out specific reference property. Put the focus on your site. And a final note about attachment C, all proof of eligibility and/or listing must be submitted to the trust by August 3rd. But please, please, please do not wait to get this information from the SHPO office as it could take upwards of 45 days to process your request. Okay, For attachment D, the required documents vary slightly between the different grant types, as you can see on the right. In general, though, attachment D, project concept and team should include a scope statement that identifies the exact work that will be completed using this grant funding. Please include all proposals and estimated fees for the proposed project, as well as all the resumes for the proposed project team, such as consultants, architects, etc. If you have selected a team, the proposal should include cost estimates from the team you have selected, i.e., architects, archaeologists, etc. Please note that all the consultants must demonstrate experience with historic preservation projects of the same or larger scope as proposed project and must meet the Secretary of Interior standards. If you do not have a consultant under consideration or a contract, please submit a document outlining the type of experience and qualifications you will be looking for when hiring a consultant and a draft RFP. The RFP should highlight the qualifications that you're looking for and what type of professionals you are seeking specifically. This is important because you want your RFP to show the evaluators that you have thought through the specific components of your project will need and that you are hiring the correct people for those types of jobs. For instance, are you doing exterior work? Maybe you're replacing an asphalt shingle for a historic slate roof. Are you looking for teams that worked with historic slate roofs before? Have their projects met the Secretary of Interior standards? Or are you new to this and have no idea what you're looking for in a project team or a consultant? Then again, we are here to help you. Please call us and we can help walk you through this process. Finally, if you have an historic structure report or a preservation plan, you may add it into attachment D. Please see the checklist on the right and the grant manual for more specific requirements for heritage tourism, MCRP, and survey projects. Okay. For attachment D, as it relates to capital grants, please still include a scope statement, resumes for the qualified project team, proposed fees, and planning documents such as preservation plan, conditions assessments, and construction documents. You are also more than welcome to submit draft RFPs if a consultant has not been selected yet. And to note, if you are applying for a multiple phase project, please include the cost estimates for the first phase, this application, and all subsequent phases that will follow. If you are applying for a multi-phase project, please include a contingency plan. It could take time for your team to start construction or receive funds, and costs can change over time. Again, it is important to demonstrate to the evaluators that you have thought through this project. Attachment E, or the project budget, also varies between planning grants and capital grants. For planning grants including HSM, MCRP, and heritage tourism, please attach the project expenditure worksheet. This document will help you outline the proposed work items and the project costs as these work items. This form is very helpful for yourself and the evaluators, especially if you are seeking to fund more than one final product with a grant. For example, preservation plan and construction documents, or if there are more than one proposal for the proposed project. So attachment E for capital projects should include documentation to any match expended, if applicable, and work completed with this match extended. Match expended is any expenditure paid before the due date of April 16th. Documentation includes signed contracts, invoices, and proof of payment. But please note that you should censor or remove bank account numbers or anything you don't want public from these documents, because we are a public agency and our documents can be requested at any time. In addition, if you have SHPO authorization for the proposed project, this is the place to add it. Also, please include before and after photos of the work completed as match expended. Finally, for attachment E, in addition to match expended, please include the capital budget worksheet as seen in the photo on the right. This form breaks down project costs by construction divisions and helps you and the evaluators understand the total project cost. This form is also helpful because if funded, it will then be translated into the form within your grant agreement. Now, if you are applying for a multi-phase grant, please complete a budget worksheet for each phase of your project. You will actually see different tabs at the body of the Excel document for this information. So for attachment F, organizational ability, please include supplemental information such as maintenance plans, the resumes and credentials of your project team and manager, also known as the people who will be administering this grant within your organization. If you are a nonprofit, please also include your organization's current year-to-date balance sheet as well as past year's balance sheets so that we can see if your organization will be able to provide matching funds and has the organizational ability to complete this project. Now, county or municipal government applications must provide a governing body resolution committing specific matching funds, and multi-phase applicants must provide documentation of match in hand for this phase and subsequent phases. If you are applying for an MCRP grant and you have an advisory of historic commission, please also include information on this committee within attachment F. Attachment G, or public access and benefit. You can see on the slide it varies slightly between grant types, so please refer to your checklist at the end of the grant application when assembling your USB attachments. Overall, though, all applications should include letters of support from your organization and/or support for the project. Your community is a great place to start. We also highly recommend reaching out to your local legislators, such as mayors, council people, and representatives. If you do not know who your local legislators are, there is a question early in the application that will lead you right to them. But note that these letters are really, really important for the evaluators because our grant program is so competitive. These letters show our evaluators that there is emphasis on diverse community involvement and legislator involvement and awareness for your project. These letters should not only express that there is support for your project, but more importantly, that there is support for your organization and that your organization is a valuable asset within your community. In addition to letters of support, please also include any press releases, news articles, event flyers, etc. that can be as simple as screenshots or social media posts or scans of physical handouts. These items demonstrate the role of your organization plays within the community. For MCRP applicants, public meeting agendas and sign-in sheets for those meetings where proposed projects were discussed should be included, and for heritage tourism, please provide documentation on your visitor readiness. If you have questions about visitor readiness, please refer to the grant manual for more information, or you can contact Ashley, whose contact information will be shown at the end of the slideshow. Okay, and finally, we have attachment H. Please add your photos in JPEG or PNG. Please note of the requested photos shown on this slide. Again, please take note of the requested photos listed on this slide. These photos are very important. Just a reminder, our evaluators are all from out of state, and they are not able to visit your site before making their decisions. So these photos are a stand-in for the evaluators. Include pictures that provide context to the area of your site. Is your site a contributing resource to a historic district? Would a picture of the streetscape give more of a sense of the historic character of the neighborhood? Attachment H is also a great place to add other miscellaneous documents, including historic photos and historic newspaper articles or drone surveys, for example. Okay, all right, everyone, clap twice if you are still with me. Okay, so now that we all have a great understanding about all of the things that should be included on your USB drive, now time to review your work and learn how to set your application apart. Applications that are considered strong are well written and concise. First, we recommend that you read through all of the questions before writing your responses so that you can get a sense of what information is appropriate to include and give structure to the overall narrative of your application. We have reduced the word count in recent years, so focus on what is specific and original to you and your site. Please remember that we can see upwards of 100 applications each year. If the evaluators have to read through pages and pages and pages of materials to understand what significance of your resource is and what your proposed project is, then it is highly unlikely during the discussion time that we will remember any of the relevant details. So keep it short, sweet, and to the point. As a result, please have a clearly defined scope of work based on planning documents. And if you do not have planning documents to support your capital needs, or if they are more than 10 to 15 years old, please call us, talk to us. Again, strong applications have letters of support from their community and from their legislators. Remember, strong applications also have compelling photos. Remember that these photos are a stand-in for a site visit. The last things a potential applicant should do before submitting anything is to check your project budget numbers in the attachments and on the applications. Please use our checklist to make sure that you have all the required information included within your application, because any information submitted after the grant deadline will not be accepted. And finally, please make sure you can open your attachments. If you can't open them, we can't open them, and neither can the evaluators. So please be able to open all of the attachments. Okay. Virtual office hours. So now if there are any specific questions that come up as you're completing your application, we will be hosting virtual office hours every other Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. beginning on February 12th. So coming up quick. Different staff members will be present during each of the office hours, so if you have a question about heritage tourism, it might be beneficial to attend a session where Ashley is present. Or if there is an archaeology question, please consider attending when Alexis isn't present. Again, all session information, including staff who will be present during the session, will be made available on our website. And if you are unable to attend the office hours or have questions that cannot wait until the office hours, then here's our staff contact information. If you do not have enough time to jot this information down, don't worry, the information is posted on our website, www.njht.gov. And this presentation will be made available as early as next week. So now we can jump into our final Q&A.
Okay. John asks, is there a limit for how old the press releases, articles, and other documentation of support can be?
I would say keep it within a recent time frame. I mean, if you're going to have things from years and years ago, that's not really relevant to what's going on at your site now. So I would say keep it to what's happening in the now, and maybe if you have future events, that would be interesting to include.
John asks, is there a template for support letters available?
I don't believe we have a template available for letters of support, but I mean, you can just reach out to different legislators. Again, we have those lists. If you need help finding them, reach out to us. But the letters of support, we want it to be more personal because, again, this is showing the evaluators that your site and your organization are really valuable to your community and that people really care about this resource and that they want it to be preserved. So while there's no template, I think the more personal they can get, the better.
And then Sue asks, how many support letters? I think that's all the question.
Well, I don't think we don't have a specific number, but I would say the more the merrier. Again, it's showing that people care about your site, people care about your resource and your organization, and that you're benefiting your community. So I would say probably hit the ground running on those and get as many as you can.
And I would add, again, especially if they're unique letters. I mean, the evaluators don't want to see the same letter 10 times. So having 10 letters that say word for word the same thing is not going to be as impactful as 10 letters from individuals who have written them themselves. So.
There's no more questions.
If there are no more questions, I want to thank everyone for spending your afternoon with us. A little bit over the 2 hours. We appreciate that. And as Tara mentioned, I mean, one thing, you could always reach out to any staff member to ask any question as you're working on your application. My saying has always been the best time to ask a question is before you submit. So now's the time to get those answers before wishing you did afterwards. And if a lot of people have been joining our office hours we've been doing for the last couple of years, so you might want to join one of those because you get to hear some other people's questions as well as being able to answer your own. Actually, we do have a question that just came out. Out of the $10 million, do we know how they will be split among grant categories? The answer is no. There's no set template for that. Partly depends on we don't know what applications we're getting. So it really does come down to how strong is each application. By far, more money goes towards capital just because, again, those are larger grants and larger projects. So we are able to fund slightly more planning, heritage tourism, MCRP grants because they're smaller grants. But it really does come down to your project, your application, your team, all the criteria that have been gone over throughout this application, not a set amount that gets divvied up. I'm looking to see if there's one last question that's going to come up, but if not, again, thank you all for joining us. But we do have a question that came up. Do we fund projects partially, meaning less than the requested amount? Typically, what we want to fund is the whole project. In years past, when we tried to spread the money more widely, projects ended up not being done because there wasn't enough money to do the project, so it ended up not going anywhere. So we like to fund the project in its entirety if we can. Sometimes it's partially if there may be an ineligible cost or something like that, so we may reduce it that way. But we do try to award the full amount of the ask if possible. And that's always our goal to do. Again, with that, I will say thank you one last time, I think. But please do reach out to staff members, come to our office hours. We do want to help you make this the strongest application as you can. And the best way to do that is to communicate with us. So on that, again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. This will be available again early next week. So if you do want to go back to any parts, but we look forward to seeing all your projects and your applications, and good luck to all of you. Thanks.